Welcome to the New Wealth Wave podcast hosted by Dr. Joaquin Wallace. We're diving deep into the intricate layers of the 7-stage generational wealth model to offer invaluable insights on legacy building, wealth accumulation and preservation, and financial growth across generations. I'm Dr. Joaquin Wallace, and this is the New Wealth Wave podcast. Hey, future wealth builders. This is Dr. Joaquin Wallace, and thank you for joining me on this new episode of the New Wealth Wave podcast. Today, we navigate through stages 1, 2, and 3 of the generational wealth model. You know, it's 7 stages, and we're going to cover 1, 2, and 3 this afternoon with Dr. Michael G. Thomas. This guy here, let me tell you, he's an accredited financial counselor, an ACE. He is a lecturer at the University of Georgia as well. He did a TED Talk, and I'm going to tell you something right now. Do yourself a favor and go check out the TED Talk. It's about financial empathy. He's an author, Black Financial Culture. He has a website as well, www.blackfinancialculture.com. Man, I am tired. Dr. Thomas, thank you for coming on to the show.
I appreciate you having me, Dr. Wallace, and sharing some information and background about me, but that pales in comparison to all the amazing work that you've done. And I'm literally following in your footsteps. And I hope that my work honors your work in terms of moving this needle as it relates to establishing generational wealth creation for households. So thank you.
I tell you what, and that's kind for you to say that. You know, oftentimes, and I mentioned it earlier, and I'm going to give you your flowers because anytime that you can refer to a person of color, an African-American male who has a terminal degree, I mean, that in itself is challenging. I mean, obviously, you know the road. It's a very challenging road, an arduous road, so to speak. Only 2.2% of the populations of African Americans have a terminal degree based on a study in 2022. So for those who are tapping in the first time on the New Wealth Wave podcast, we focus on the 7-stage generational wealth model. And we'll go over the 7 stages as well. But it's a model that I created, and I felt it was time for a model to be created, give kind of like a GPS, a pathway on how to walk towards generational wealth. So for those who are tapping in for the first time, make sure that you click on the link in the description and download a PDF copy as well. So let's go over the model itself. Stage 1 is our internal and external ecosystem. Stage 2 is our financial genetic code, which we talk about anxiety and trauma. Stage 3, financial healing. And this is where we attempt to reprogram your financial genetic code. Stage 4 is financial edification, which focuses on financial literacy and financial inclusion. Stage 5 is financial well-being. I know Dr. Thomas and I and everyone out there is trying to get to financial well-being, financial health, where we're not outliving our income. Stage 6 is generational knowledge, which we create our financial footprints that leads us towards stage 7, generational wealth. So, Michael, before we get started, I don't want to wear you out, but this is going to probably be the toughest question of all the questions for you. Tell us a fun fact about yourself.
Yeah, fun fact. My dad was a Marine. So even though I was born in Gary, Indiana, I started school in Honolulu, Hawaii. So most of my early childhood experiences were on a beach at a luau amidst a lot of other military family. And I viewed the military as family. And quite honestly, I don't think that I've ever been a part of a community that was as connected as the military community that I was a part of when I was younger. So I'm definitely a beach person. I love listening to the waves. It is very serene. It's very calming. I feel like I am the best version of me near the beach or water. So my early childhood experiences were spent on beaches in Hawaii.
I anticipate you eventually going to move to San Diego, California. I mean, if you love the water, you definitely need to move to San Diego, California.
The way inflation and housing prices and all that's working right now, if I don't move now, I don't see that happening.
But that's why we're here. That's why we do what we do. We're trying to get to financial well-being. That's what we're doing. So we got to work to that conclusion stage on stage 4. That's what you're helping people to do.
I live in rural Georgia for cheap, and then I'll visit
Well, listen, I had a chance to, watch your TED Talk. One thing that you missed out on, I think you have a future as a stand-up comedian too. You had them rolling up there. So that's a fun fact that you didn't mention. So if you haven't had a chance to watch his TED Talk, do yourself a favor and watch it. So you had a chance to review the model. What was your initial thoughts?
Yeah, I one of the things that I think was incredibly fascinating about the model was that it's very forward thinking, honestly, especially for our space. So for instance, for CFPs and financial advisors and planners, we're just now really becoming comfortable with the psychological, emotional, relational system dynamics of wealth management, and even thinking about how we best serve our clients and how we can effectively address some of these other barriers that may exist in order to provide considerable value add for the people who are seeking our advice. And so the model that you've presented actually, I think, is a great framework in terms of how to understand or to even to begin to understand the individuals that we're working with. So even that first element of the model, right? Thinking about internal, external systems. And this is something that I'm really big on because I do a lot of speaking engagements on systems theory and not just thinking about it externally, but then also internal systems from a cognitive behavior therapy perspective in a way that we internalize events and then how events ultimately can impact the way that we think, feel, and behave as it relates to an experience that's transpired in our lives, whether it's current or whether it's in the past. And what happens oftentimes for individuals is that we forget the event, but that experience leaves an indelible mark in our brain. And when I say indelible mark, it literally creates a synapse, right? And that synapse, if reinforced over time, ultimately becomes an adaptive way in which we behave once we experience a stimulus, even though we don't remember the initial event that is causing this cycle of behavior and pattern, right? And we have not always been in a space where we've considered how someone's brain, neurological chemicals like cortisol or even dopamine could actually be driving behavior. And so what we would do in the past is that we would say, oh, this person doesn't want what's best for them. Like literally, let's just be honest, Dr. Wallace, we've navigated a space where we've literally shamed an entire population of individuals around their finances without understanding this more complete picture about the actual lived experience or the experiences that people have and how those things ultimately impact the way that they engage with money. We literally were operating out of shame and guilt. We're just now beginning to turn that curve collectively to move away from shame and guilt, but to actually embrace empathy and compassion because now we have the capacity to begin to understand that there's context, there's nuance, there's behavioral factors, there are systems externally and internally that ultimately can be impacting the behaviors of my client. And it's not because they don't desire what's best for them, right? So we can't just put people in a box anymore. So what I love about your model is that it's not just a model for an individual in terms of how we think about where they are along the model, but it's also an effective tool to actually help a service provider conceptualize different elements of where a person can be to then assess where that individual is and what is going to be the most effective tool at this juncture to help them move along to the next phase so that they can sustainably engage in whatever process it is that we want for them to engage in to achieve some long-term financial goal. So I love its holistic way of viewing individuals because humans are not businesses. We've adopted in the financial space a lot of business models for human beings that don't naturally operate like a business does. Like when I speak to my class, I ask them all the time, when you take out debt, are you taking out debt as a leveraged position to acquire assets? And then those assets that you're acquiring, you're hoping that they're going to be revenue generating so that now they show up on the income statement, right? Like that's the way a business thinks. I don't know many households that think about things in that way. So we've already inherently created a gap in terms of assuming that individuals are going to respond rationally in the way that maybe a business or a business owner would as it relates to household production and things of that nature. That's not a consistent or an effective viewpoint to have in terms of the way that we engage with household finances. And that's become incredibly prevalent in a way that now we start to view the way that we work with clients. And I think it's for the better. And I think that will only continue to evolve with the paradigm that you've created and others like it to better serve the individuals that we've been tasked to serve.
I'm going to ask you a question. It took me several years to create this model, but some kind of way you were able to go through osmosis through my brain and articulate everything that the model is all about. I mean, this is scaring me right now because what you
Yeah.
just said was what my thought pattern was. And I want to ask you a question because I think this question kind of sets the tone of the conversation we're going to have today. Before you became an advocate in this financial literacy and educational space, where were you on the model?
Yeah, that's a very good question. If I can, I want to pair models here. I want to bring in the trans-theoretical model of change and put that right above number one in terms of pre-contemplative state, meaning that I wasn't even aware of what I was navigating to even begin to have the capacity to understand anything about systems or how they impact me, or even whether or not I had the agency even in navigating the systems that I'm navigating, which is a very different conversation in of itself. So I was in pre-contemplative state for a good bit of time. I had always had a knack for wanting to understand money and being involved in the financial space, but it was very just kind of academic in nature, meaning just basic things, budget, invest, but not understanding nuance and context like your model builds out. And as we would think about when we talk about systems theory and internal systems, external systems, and you're an agent navigating an environment, and then how these things interact, and then how we engage, and all these different things, my mind wasn't there for a very long time. It wasn't until I started volunteering with an organization called Circles of Truth County. And I went through a training that covered Bridges Out of Poverty by Ruby Payne. And within that training, it talked about different socioeconomic status levels and social codes that were associated with socioeconomic status. So if I'm on the lower rung of SES, there are actually a number of social codes that we abide by within this system in order to effectively navigate the system and its circumstances. Those same social codes don't work in middle class SES. And then if you're middle class socioeconomic status, what you do to thrive and survive and to make it and engage with the community, if you were to take those norms to the lived experience of the lower rungs of SES, those things don't work there because you don't have the same access. You don't have the same resources, right? So you actually have to adopt these new norms in order to navigate the space. And then we can talk about upper middle class, wealthy, so on and so forth, right? And it was in that moment where I had a revelatory event for me in terms of seeing myself outside of myself and how I'm existing within the systems that I'm navigating. And that was the first time where I'd had that level of an awakening, and it completely transformed the way that I viewed me, the way that when I say view me, my thought patterns, my internal self-talk, my emotions, what's triggering these things, in terms of having those deeper levels of conversations with self, or even with a therapist to unpack what that is. So I was doing therapy in 2009, 2010, utilizing resources in order to begin this process of saying, hey, something's not right here. I'm feeling anxiety. There were situations where I was even, you had mentioned sabotage in a conversation that we were having prior to starting this. And there were parts of me that was feeling unworthy about being in the position that I was in. Given that I come from a background where you don't see success at the level that I had seen it. And there was a part of me that was feeling undeserving of it. Any opportunity, making money made me feel guilty, made me feel shame, made me feel all these types of different things. Where's this coming from? Right. And then I started working with people in the community that were experiencing a lot of different things. And so I hit a wall at one point. I was working with some clients, and then Sherry, who oversees the program, I was telling her, hey, like this one person that I'm working with, she's not doing the thing that I'm asking for her to do, whatever it may be. And she was like, well, tell me what's going on. And I was like, well, she won't do the budget, right? We talk about her completing the budget. She won't complete the budget. How is she going to move forward if she don't complete the budget? And for me at that point in time, all I could think about was budget is the primary means and way in which we engage with people. There was no context. There was no circumstantial things. I wasn't considering her emotional state. I wasn't considering whether or not, even in her emotional state, or is she working 2 jobs? Is she working 3 jobs? Does she have the emotional capacity, right? Working 5 days, 6 days a week, then taking care of a family and things of that nature, to actually create a space to then add on to this other layer of finances, which is creating stress and all these different factors. My mindset at that time was just like many other people's, is that she doesn't want to improve her circumstance and situation. And then Sherry at that point said, well, have you actually gotten to really know her? Have you really gotten to understand her system and the things that she's navigating and why she may not be? If you're approaching her in a way, and maybe you don't recognize your demeanor, maybe you don't recognize your tone or your body language, okay, she may not even want to actually engage with you in conversation because she immediately is feeling that you're judging her, which is then increasing more cortisol and stress, right? So you can actually be adversely impacting the situation and not even realizing that you are. Dr. Wallace, I've had several of these moments where there's nothing you can say except for feeling all this negative emotion because you're trying to help people. You realize that you're actually hurting. And so I got in the car and I do like I always do, cut off the music, drive home in silence, walk in the house, don't say anything, go into the room, lights off, and I'm just sitting with myself, right? But it was in that moment where, again, I had to deal with my own dissonance and I had to dig deeper in order to most effectively position myself so that I could actually serve in a way that circles needed for me to serve. And they had an entire paradigm. They utilized social capital. The individuals that you serve, they were the leaders of their own lives. You were just partnering with them as they navigated like so many amazing concepts and ideas that they've always done, circles of the organization, that we're just now kind of adopting in a way that we think about social capital and all these other different things. But that was the time and space where I really started to tap in to this process of, you know what, in order for me to serve people, I actually need to step back and do more listening and less talking. And that's when I started my journey of understanding and beginning to embrace what empathy is. Because I thought that, okay, you have all this information, you have all this knowledge, and you just want to go in and just unload on people, right? If you do this and we can do this and we can do X, Y, and Z, because you could just see it so clearly and you want the best for people. But what I felt I've learned from going from like this financial literacy standpoint to being an advocate and engaging in advocacy, and then ultimately understanding empathy and what compassion was, is that it was that process that actually led me to my own understanding of self, which then allowed for me to begin to engage in real, genuine understanding and care for others so that I could more or less use my social capital, use my knowledge base, use whatever I had at my disposal as a tool simply to aid someone where it was needed, but only to do so after thoughtfully listening, considering, and understanding, and then asking for permission in many instances. Are you okay if I provide some advice here? Not, I'm going to tell you in a paternalistic way, this is what you need to do, or shame you, or cause you to feel a level of guilt. And that's what I was doing before. But it was after that experience when I ultimately started to evolve and started to engage in a different trajectory from about 2008 on.
It's interesting. Future Wealth Builders, if you have not yet subscribed to the New Wealth Wave podcast, make sure you hit the subscribe button because this type of information needs to be shared in our community and in all communities itself. And one thing that I always preference when I develop the model is that it's not a race-based model. Everyone is particularly navigating within that model itself. And that leads me to my third question. I love how you provided your aha moment as well. So the third and final question is, where are you currently located on the model?
Yeah. So as I think about it, honestly, I'm at multiple places on the model right now. I'm in a phase where I am able to actually generate and create wealth. I'm in a phase where I'm constantly tooling up in terms of financial education. I'm in a phase where I'm still unpacking more or less my internal systems in terms of, because this is the thing, what people fail to realize is that like your model is a model that is a continuous model. Because as you navigate different seasons of life, then different things reveal themselves to you. And then as different things reveal themselves to you, you actually find yourself going back through the model all over again. So for instance, if I'm navigating a space where I'm just trying to have some financial stability, okay, which is an important aspect of financial well-being, which is being able to navigate financial shocks and all these other different things that may arise. But let's say once I've gotten there, that's not the end of the journey. So I've gotten to financial stability. Now I'm in a space to where now I'm trying to grow my money based on my risk capacity and my capacity generally in terms of my savings rate or whatever it may be. Even within that process, you still have to go back because you're going to have to now engage in this internal self-talk of, do you even believe that saving for your future is going to matter or if it's important, right? So now I have to navigate this internal system and this external system of, do I believe that this is worth this journey if I have not seen it done? Or I have family members who have told me, well, don't waste your time with investing. It doesn't work. Or I lost a lot of money in the markets, or whatever it may be. And then, so I'm internally dealing with narratives now about growing my money, saving my money. And now I'm also dealing with narratives externally in terms of, where do I place my money, right? Is that safe? Is that secure? There's this internal dissonance that's transpiring here that now I'm having to navigate. So now I'm literally navigating your model all over again. And then you get to another level and then it triggers some type of emotion. Maybe it's estate planning now. You've been creating wealth. Now you're thinking, oh, where does any of this go? Do I trust this person? Do I not trust this person? Is this person a good person to give money to? Or maybe I haven't created a system in which maybe my wealth creation strategy has been in isolation. Now, because it's been in isolation all this time, because I don't trust people and I've used actually wealth as a way to build a moat around me. Now you're telling me I have to think about how I pass this money on to somebody, and I don't even trust the people around. So now I'm dealing with external systems in terms of family. I'm dealing in terms of internal systems, in terms of my perceptions about this model. This is not a one and done model. So every level of this process, as it relates to wealth creation and generational wealth creation, as you get to various levels of it, it's going to cause you to experience a new level in your life that then ultimately you're going to have to deal with internally and externally and kind of work your way all the way through. So my point is this, is that I've been on your model since the beginning of time. And with where I am right now and what I know about my life and how I've experienced life and how as I get older, I realize that I really don't know anything, Dr. Wallace. Like the older I get, even though I read a lot and I try to be incredibly perceptive about things, life, culture, so much money, I realize that I really don't know what I don't know. And life just continues to unfold beautifully, but in interesting ways that I don't have all the answers. So to answer your question, I feel like the way that you design your model, as I continue to navigate different seasons and the way I think about my lived experiences, I'm constantly revisiting various elements of it. The good thing is that because I have learned how to process certain things, that working back through the model gets easier over time because I know how to handle and mitigate my emotions. I use deep breathing, box breathing tactics. I do a lot of walk and talk type things. Physical exercise is good for me. Right before I talk, I went and did like a 2-mile run because what it does is I always feel like I'm the best version of myself after a light, easy run. Nothing crazy. I'm not trying to break any records. It was a slow run, y'all. That 2 miles almost took me 30 minutes. All right. But I got it done. No shame, no guilt. But I feel really good after that. So I've learned in terms of navigating kind of what your model is, how I best work through different elements of it. And that's gotten better as I navigate new seasons of my life. But I constantly find myself in terms of my internal and external systems. And if I can get to a great space internally with internal self-talk, in terms of mitigating stress and finding healthy ways of getting dopamine in the way that I navigate my life during a particular season, then everything else works pretty well for me. So that first level is always a go-to for me. Internal, external systems. How is that impacting my emotions, my mood, my perceptions? Am I engaging in catastrophic thinking about something? Why? Is it real? Is it anxiety? Is it born out of, again, an adaptive response to the way that I navigate it? I'm a little bit better equipped to engage in that process than I was earlier in life, but I'm constantly revisiting that element of it. And then once I've gotten that piece, I move pretty quickly to the rest of the phases.
Dr. Thomas, episode 5, we had Dr. Marsha Rubin. If you haven't had a chance to take a listen to that, Future Wealth Builders, if you have yet to listen to that episode, please do, because we talk about the neuroplasticity, we talk about the amygdala, we talked about hippocampus, dopamine, cortisol, some of the same
Yep.
things that you're speaking about.
Yep.
And I just want to add, I run 2 miles as well, because it really does help me in regards to my dopamine, if you will. It relaxes me. It allows me to communicate. But,
Yes.
this is not a podcast speaking about running and everything, but physical health is important. But so let's talk about your book. You wrote a book focusing on Black financial culture. Can you provide some insight into your thoughts and theories?
Dr. Wallace, based on understanding a little bit of your background, I know that you've had a moment where there was something that was in your heart and in your spirit that just would not leave you, and you had to act upon it because there's no peace. Right. And that's what this book was. In our space, when you pursue a PhD, generally speaking, you are asked to write papers or research papers. These research papers oftentimes go to publications or whatever it may be, journal articles that oftentimes are behind paywalls that are written in such a way that the vast majority of people would not understand them or be able to decode them in any meaningful way. And the whole reason for me to get my PhD was to make information accessible, point blank period. That was the reason why I navigated this journey, not to make it inaccessible. So one of the first things that I promised myself was after I completed the PhD journey was that I was just going to actually take some time to write a book to talk about solution-focused therapy, to talk about cognitive behavior therapy, to talk about the trans-theoretical model of change. There's prospect theory in the book. There's bounded rationality in the book. There's client-centered therapeutic elements in the book. But I don't speak to any of these things directly. I don't take you on this journey of this is what CBT is, or this is what solution focus is, or this is what bounded rationality is, or this is what prospect theory is, or this is what systems theory is, or this is what social capital is based on James Coleman's work. And then going further on and looking at social capital in terms of bonding, bridging, linking capital, and breaking it. No, the whole point is, could I actually take all these elements of information that is academia and to write a book where every single last element of that is in there? I include empathy. I start with empathy in the book and I end with compassion in the book. But a reader would never know that they are actually reading academic research that's been distilled down in such a way that my mom would be able to read this book. That was the whole point. It had to be mom tested. My mom doesn't like to read. And so when I finished the book and I gave her a copy and I said, hey, I'd love for you to read it, she finished it in a day and a half. And then when she did that, and she said, you know what? She was like, if books were written like this, I would read more books. And so that made me feel really, really good because that was the whole point, was to write something that even people who don't like reading would pick up and say, this is interesting. Let me go to the next chapter, right? And let me go to the next chapter. And then not know that what they are reading is inclusive of all these things in academia that would be inaccessible to them because we're using language and paradigms and constructs and the way that we engage with data and all these different things that would be like, I don't even know what I'm looking at, right? So that's exactly what I did with this book. I took everything that I knew from academia and I placed it in the book in a way that people could receive the substance and the meat of it without realizing that this is what you're receiving. And that was the whole point. And the reason why I entitled it Black Financial Culture was for 3 reasons, quite honestly. The first reason was that Black as in being in the Black financially, which is incredibly important because when we talk about companies, and if you're in the red or in the black, then if you're in the black, that's a good thing, right? So if you don't know me, you don't know what this book should entail. The only thing that you can do is infer a meaning about the book as relates to your unique paradigm. And then also the color Black. The reason why I focused on that was also because Black, the color, literally absorbs all colors of light. And generally speaking, it creates warmth, right? You don't go out into the hot sun with an all Black clothing or attire on because it's going to absorb the light and you're going to be warmer. And so the whole point is that Black financial culture, by absorbing all the light, all these ideas, all of academia, all of these lived experiences, that it then creates warmth and connection to the book. And then lastly, Black as in Black culture is not me going and doing extensive research. I saw in your background, you have the book Cast. I have it over as well on my bookshelf. I'm not doing the work like Wilkerson was doing in her work in terms of very detailed journalistic, this is what happened, because I think there's enough of that work out there. Black is in terms of what was my experience in terms of navigating what I perceive to be Black culture as I'm growing up, Black financial culture as I'm growing up. So now you're seeing the world through my eyes and the way that I experience these things. So it doesn't come off as judgmental. It does not come off as hierarchical, meaning that this is what you need to do. This is how you need to do it. It's very vulnerable. So in that sense, what I'm saying is that I want you to see my Black experience, or what I perceive to be my Black experience, and how we engage with money, or how I engage with money, internalizing it, making money mistakes, doing good things with my resources, so that you can have that sense of connection, you can have that sense of warmth, and then ultimately you can engage in vulnerability with me if you don't have the capacity to be vulnerable, so that you can heal the very things that you need to heal, going back to your model of healing, right? So that we can begin to now work towards being able to engage in wealth creation sustainably. Because what I understand is that if we have not dealt with deep emotional, psychological wounds, deep holes that we have in our spirit and in our heart, yes, we can start off on a financial journey, but we won't be able to do it sustainably over time because we haven't healed these other areas. So I wanted to be vulnerable, to demonstrate vulnerability and authenticity, so that someone who has been worried about being vulnerable to their unique experiences because of feelings of judgment, shame, guilt, or whatever it may be, it would free them up so that they can engage in their own journey of vulnerability. So now that we can engage in this process of healing, and then ultimately working towards warmth and then being in the Black as it relates to their financial lives. That was the point of the book. It's academic without being academic. It's a horizontal relationship. I'm talking to the reader, not at the reader. And in the very end of the book, I basically end with this proclamation, which is, at the end of the day, Black financial culture is your choice. It's not for me to tell you what it is, because the whole point of having freedom is choice. So for me, it's whatever you decide to do with your resources, with your money, I just need you to own it. And what I've learned over the years working with clients is that the sooner I'm able to see me in my financial journey, the sooner I'm able to make change in my financial journey. Because now I'm recognizing the agency that I have, whether that's for the good of my finances or the detriment of my finances. In either case, in some elements, there's a choice piece here. And I just wanted to give people the freedom to say that, hey, are you even realizing what you're choosing? And now that I've opened you up to start to think about what you're engaging with, do you still choose to do what you're currently doing? At that point in time, that's your choice. That's freedom. My only ask is that you own the outcomes moving forward. And that's where I leave it, because I didn't want it to be something where I'm telling people what to do or how to live their life or X, Y, and Z. That's a very personal thing. But what I am challenging individuals is, are you even aware of how you're living your life and how you're impacting your life with the things that you can control? And understanding that there are things that are outside of our controls. And I speak to those subtleties so that individuals don't feel as if I'm speaking to things without considering nuance. Therefore, I'm going to shut down because this person doesn't even understand my lived experience. Well, I share my experience in order to allow people to just to be able to connect in that way. So that's the book, Black Financial Culture, Building Wealth from the Inside Out, because it's my perspective that wealth creation does happen inwardly and then manifests itself outwardly. What I've learned over the years is that when we don't address the things inwardly and we get wealth outwardly, what happens is that we use wealth and resources to self-soothe things inwardly and to fix things inwardly that money in and of itself does not have the capacity to do. And that's why you'll have people who can run into large sums of money and then their lives are a ruin and they're a wreck because we thought that money in and of itself was going to be the saving grace. Money does not have the capacity to love us back. And that was a theme that was in the book, that we need to start with self-love and then navigate what that process looks like in order to then be the best version of ourselves so that we can position ourselves to acquire more, but to do so sustainably. That was the spirit of it, but it had to be done because it was sitting in my core. There was no way that I was going to have peace if I didn't write.
I tell you what, future wealth builders, make sure that you go online to order the book, Black Financial Culture, Building Wealth from Inside Out. And you can learn more to go to his website, www.blackfinancialculture.com. I'm hopeful that I can get a signed copy. I'm going to purchase a book.
Dr. Wallace, I got a copy for you. Just send me your mailing address and I will send it out on Monday or Tuesday at the latest.
Definitely, I'm going to hold you to that because, and the reason why I
Please
say
do.
that, it's so important because I firmly believe this as well. There's a lot of great information that's out there in regards to financial therapy, financial behavior. There's tons. And now you see it's becoming a very fashionable topic to speak about. Instagram and things of that nature have tons of financial social influencers that are out there. But I'm not going to go get on my soapbox. I'm not going to do that because you was able to do that for me. All right. So I'm not going to do that. But what I am going to say is that there are individuals that aren't equipped to really speak about this to the level that they are. But hey, again, we're so starved as a culture to receive some information. It must be good information. But having said that, tell me what differentiates your book than the other books that are out there written about this space we're in today.
Oh, I'll be honest with you. One, the way that I wrote my book, I'm utilizing literally Black experiences. The references that I use in a book are kind of Black cultural experiences. There's some universal themes to it. But so for instance, just the whole notion of saving money in a Crown Royal bag. Like for me growing up, like chips, money, whatever it may be, like there was a Crown Royal bag. There was X, Y, Z in terms of the way that we would do things like that. Hip hop culture and music and things of that nature. I use a lot of references to hip hop culture and music in a book to drive things. I use a lot. One of my favorite movies is Paid in Full, which was written by Dame Dash. And there were a couple of other people who helped produce the movie and things of that nature. That's a movie or a movie reference that most people outside of Black culture, if you're not within that, you don't see that as like being like this cultural phenomenon. But that's a huge movie in our space. So I'm using a lot of those different things. But to be very honest with you, we oftentimes talk about vulnerability, but we don't demonstrate it. So what I've done in my book is that I actually demonstrate authentically the very things that we talk about. We talk about going to therapy, but we don't talk about the experience of therapy. I talk about the experience of therapy, meaning that I knew that I needed therapy, but I didn't want to go to therapy. That's a real lived experience. I talked about how I scheduled my appointment for therapy, but then I balked at it for weeks just to make the call to go to therapy. Then when I called and I scheduled my appointment to go to therapy, I didn't show up. And then when I showed up, we started touching on things that were very vulnerable, very emotional, made me feel uncomfortable. I didn't want to go back. And then I didn't feel as if I was connecting with my therapist. That's a lived experience. You can go to therapy and not feel like you have a connection. Doesn't mean that therapy doesn't work. It just means that you may not have the right person for you. And then I found the right person that made all the difference in the world in terms of helping me to unpack trauma outside of normalizing it, because that's what I had done. That was my adaptive response to growing up in Gary, Indiana. We lived in Hawaii till about kindergarten, first grade. And then from there, I was in a Gary school system from then on. I wasn't immersed in gang culture growing up. But when I got to Gary, it was clearly, the first thing my mom would say was, what gang are you a part of? You're part of the Thomas gang. We never had that conversation until we moved to Gary. Never had that conversation. When I was in North Carolina and Hawaii, I can go wherever I wanted to go. There were no restrictions. When we moved to Gary, it was, you can't go here. You can't go to the park. You can't do this. Can't do that. So for me, like just kind of navigating those seasons of my life, just being restricted in terms of my experiences has actually made all the difference in the way that I ultimately impacted and engaged with money.
Here's one question that I really need you to kind of lean into this question. Okay. Let me see you lean on camera. I need to see you lean in. Physically lean in. Okay. All right.
Yeah,
So I want you to lean in on this question. Do you believe that financial literacy is the end all to achieve generational wealth?
Not at all. This is the thing. When you work in a space and you actually serve people and it goes beyond just the academics of it or some of the canned recommendations we make, you start to realize that people are experiencing real life stuff that goes beyond just a budget, goes beyond just financial information. You have to have the capacity to be able to use the information. Now, this depends on how we define financial literacy. When there are a number of definitions as it relates to financial literacy, I generally think about financial literacy as both knowledge and the application of knowledge. The issue, though, is that you can have someone who has financial literacy but lacks agency or lacks confidence in their ability to do the thing. So I can have all the knowledge in the world, but I cannot feel as if that thing that you're asking me to do is for me, or I believe in the thing, or that it will actually work, right? So there's no confidence. There's no sense of agency, even though I have all this amazing financial knowledge. So now we have to be able to address what is preventing this person from having confidence. Is it my social capital? Is it because of the systems that I grew up in? Is it because of internal self-talk, because of different narratives and the way that I've adapted or my adaptive response to certain situations that I've experienced in life? Could it be historical narratives about slavery, Jim Crow, all the different types of things that have transpired? And my worldview, right, is that there is no space for a Black person to be able to win in this world. Why even begin? Why even try, right? So there are a lot of different aspects to this process that go beyond just a budget or a spending plan or investing money. If I'm investing, are we talking about emotional regulation with investing? Because when I teach my boys to invest, both of which started at 7, the most conversations we have around investing outside of being able to analyze the quality of a company is how do I regulate my emotions during downturns in the market? That's where we have the most of our conversations. So if I'm going to talk to somebody about investing, I just can't tell you to invest in X, Y, and Z and not also prepare you for market volatility or understand anything about your risk capacity in terms of what we're navigating. And not just me asking you like, hey, how comfortable are you with taking risks or doing a scale? But I need to show you visually what this looks like because people are stimulated more so visually than they are by a phrase that they're given that they have to answer. Because now we're talking about hot and cold empathetic states. Of course, I'm going to tell you if I'm in a cold empathetic state that if the market goes down, I'm going to be okay because I'm not triggered emotionally by the response that I'm giving you at this point in time. But if I'm in a hot state, which means that the market is tanking, all I'm seeing is negative news whenever my phone is alerting me on something. And then my portfolio is down X, Y, and Z. Making that determination to stay in the market is very different when the market is running and it's up. So financial literacy, unfortunately, just kind of focuses on, hey, if you could just literally speaking, debt management, cash flow management, insurances, and investments, if you know better, you do better. Knowing better and doing better are separate skill sets. So if we want for people to both know better and do better, one, we have to think about how do we present and disseminate information in a palatable way so that people can understand it, begin to trust it, and believe that they have agency with regard to using that information. And then to do better, now we have to create instances where we provide exposure, that we help people work through the processes of things, or we actually structure it. So if I tell somebody, hey, all you need to do is invest in the S&P 500, go to Vanguard, or go to Fidelity or whatever it may be, just set up account, set up your brokerage account, and then just kind of select the S&P 500, you'll be fine. If I go to Vanguard, once I get to the page, it's going to ask me, if I'm an institutional investor, if I'm an X investor, if I'm a Y investor. And now I need to actually start decoding what is an institutional investor? Oh, Dr. Thomas didn't tell me this part. So now I'm jumping around just to try to figure out which one do I click on. Now you've clicked on that and you go to the page. Now you have all this information about Roth IRAs, traditional IRAs, maybe information about cryptocurrency, and then all these different mutual funds and index funds and expense ratios. And then once you get in and you start looking at all the different options that are available to you, now I'm overwhelmed because nobody told me about this part. Now I'm starting to experience stress because I'm having to make a choice and I don't even know if I'm making the right choice. And he just told me just to go select an S&P 500, but there's different types of S&P 500s, right? And nobody walked me through any of this. So what happens is that now I make a choice. I'm feeling uncomfortable about it. I have more stress. And then on the back end, I make the choice. That's if I made the choice, right? It may just sit in a money market account and I think that I'm invested, but I'm not invested because nobody told me that once I've opened the account, that it just sits in a money market account until I choose the investment. But if I did choose the investment and I was already uncertain about it, just not thinking about system dynamics and how people experience this process, then if I experience volatility in the market, that volatility in the market is now compounded by the volatility that I have internally because I didn't know if I made the right choice to begin with based on overly simplified information around investing. And then we get mad at people when they pull out of the market, when the market goes down. So when we're disseminating financial knowledge, are we disseminating complete financial knowledge that takes into consideration what the entirety of a system, what the entirety of the process looks like, so that we can actually help people navigate these spaces with confidence? And that's where we lack. Until we effectively address the holistic piece of this. So instance, going back to the first instance of your model, I can tell somebody to go invest, but what if something in their internal system is causing them to balk at the issue? We have to address that. If we don't address that, there's no way that they invest sustainably. I might be able to get them to invest, but whether they stay invested is a very different thing. I can get someone to get life insurance, but whether or not they keep life insurance is a very different thing. I can get someone to budget for a couple of months, but whether they stay budgeted is a very different thing. So unfortunately, what's kind of transpired in this process is that we've focused on these very limited key performance indicators that don't address the totality of how we effectively serve people, that addresses both the knowledge base, the behavioral base as well, to create a more complete picture of how we effectively serve people. It's not somebody came to my program, they didn't know anything, they couldn't answer the 5-question Lusardi scale prior to my program, but now after the program, they can answer all 5 questions. To me, that's the gamey way of basically saying that I engaged this intervention and look, it worked. These individuals have more knowledge. And because they have more knowledge, they're going to do better. That's just not how this actually plays out, right? So financial literacy in and of itself is not enough. There are notions of capability, which means that people have access to the resources and things that they need, or with the access that they do have, are those resources, are those institutions in the community that are actually doing right by the people that they serve? And that's a conversation that has to be had as well. And so if a community is distrusting of the services in their community, until we address why they have a distrust, then how do we ever facilitate trust?
I tell you what, Dr. Thomas, you leaned into that times 10 because what you're speaking about is why I created the model itself, because it was basically an inward look at myself and I'm in the space. And so I love how you tied that in, talking to clients about the difference between systemic and non-systemic. They don't know. You mentioned a couple of the ratios, Sharp, CAP-M. There's so many ratios that are out there that we're not privy of. And it's a dynamic discussion that you have to have with each of those individuals. And one thing I want to add too is that when you talk about stage 5, financial well-being, I always refer to the fact that everyone has a different well-being. Everyone sees it different than the next person. And I loved how in your book that you referenced movies and rap culture and things of that nature. I always reference the fact that in the Wong Song, we say, get rich or die trying, right? I mean, that's one of the things that's embedded in our culture. And I always go back to rich is transactional, where wealth is legacy. We're really chasing the transactional side of it versus the legacy side because it's not sexy. The rich is sexy because it's transactional. But as you mentioned earlier, there's a lot of individuals who are inherited money, who lose money, athletes, entertainers, things of that nature.
And this is a misnomer. It's not just athletes and entertainers. They're doctors, they're lawyers, they're engineers. And unfortunately, sometimes I think that we put a bubble on individuals who mismanage and don't use their money well, when this issue is a thread across all different professional dynamics. But we don't have conversations about doctors that are gambling money away and doing X, Y, and Z, or other individuals who are good at making money, or business people, but what they make, they spend. They don't have
Absolutely.
any real knowledge of investing and all these other different things. So, and again, I just want to make sure that I reiterate that this issue is just not a athlete, entertainer, that narrative. We continue to have that, but this actually goes across all domains of individuals who have a very real need for these services that we provide. And just because you're wealthy does not mean, to your point, that you don't need to go through that model that you created, starting with step one, because you didn't start with step one, even though you came into the money, is not actually providing the benefit that you hoped for. So to the point that you made earlier, it's for everybody and even across socioeconomic status.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had a chance to speak to the San Francisco Economic Roundtable, a bunch of millionaires, as you said. But then one of the individuals that was in the presentation sent me a direct email. And she's 80 years of age. She's accumulated a lot of cash and she's well off, real wealthy. And she says in her email, I am still in stage 2 of my life. I would have been able to do much better with my family and my kids, but I was not able to get out of my own way based upon my internal external ecosystem, as well as stage 2. And she never received financial healing, reprogramming of the financial genetic code. And it goes back to what you're saying is that, oftentimes and not, I don't meet with athletes and entertainers. This is what we read. This is what the media gives us. I meet with the regular person like you and I, some 6-figure earners and things of that nature. And we're constantly navigating through the model itself. And one final point on the model is based upon 3 phases: the past, the present, and the future. And I love how you articulate it because you are constantly navigating each one of those stages. I'm constantly navigating each one of those stages because life gets in the way. So sometimes you may be going clockwise, sometimes you may be going counterclockwise, sometimes you may be going diagonal, wherever you're located in your life, right? I mean, that's what the model is all about. That's what it suggests. So one final question for you. I mean, first, before I get to the final question, I want to say this. Future Wealth Builders, this has been an impactful podcast episode. We'd like to thank Dr. Michael G. Thomas, PhD. And if you think this information is worthy, please subscribe, because if you subscribe to the podcast, it allows other listeners to hear this information as well. It may not be for you, but it may be for someone else. But please make sure you subscribe to the podcast because the information is evergreen. It continues. It will always be in place. It's just a great conversation. And again, when I get a chance to talk to someone with a terminal degree who has accomplished so many things such as you, it's always an honor to have you on the program itself. Final question for you. What do you want the listeners to gain from this particular podcast session?
I don't think anything is achievable without trust. And there are times where life has shown us that maybe within our immediate systems, maybe in systems outside of our immediate systems, that I just can't trust it. If there was anything that I would advocate for in this moment, to encourage you to be courageous enough to try to trust this. Dr. Wallace's model that he's created is everything that's in it, as I've looked at it and reviewed it, is basically ahead of the curve in terms of where we are only just beginning to go in this space. So in essence, you're getting alpha in terms of the value add that you're receiving and what we know to actually work and help people sustainably work towards their wealth goals. And you're going to hear me say sustainably. You heard me say that a lot because I'm all about sustainable action. But if you're struggling with this notion of trust, that is a signal that we're at step 1 of the model, which is now understanding, unpacking my internal, external systems and understanding where these issues of trust come from. And then establishing the courage to consider maybe situations where you did trust and those people or individuals proved worthy of trust. Now we have dissonance because in my system, as I've navigated, everything isn't lacking trust. And there have been instances and situations where I could trust, even if I didn't feel as if it was worthy of trusting it. I would encourage you to be courageous in this moment because you have 2 individuals who are speaking here who have a profound love and deep affection for your well-being. They aren't trying to sell you anything, nothing gimmicky at all, but genuinely want to see something transpire that's beyond ourselves and that will live well beyond the work that we do during the time that we have here on Earth. This is legacy work, as Dr. Wallace had mentioned. Simon Sinek wrote a book on the infinite game and the finite game. It's very clear that the both of us are working on an infinite game, meaning that the work that we're trying to do is going to live well beyond us. And I just ask for you to tap into your courage, to trust, and know that you have two individuals here that are speaking to you that not only want your trust, but are going to prove to you each and every day in the way that we engage and we represent ourselves that we are worthy of your trust and re-earning your trust every day so that you can tap into what we know is ultimately your reality, which is that the best is yet to come. And so I would love to just kind of end on that, but it does take courage. And I want to commend you for that courage that you're about to step into, that you're about to lead into, because you have it. And we are worthy of that trust.
Appreciate those final thoughts. I almost became verklempt. I mean, thank you, because again, it's something that we're both passionate about. I appreciate it as well. Future Wealth Builders, this is a great, impactful podcast, and we'd like to thank Dr. Michael G. Thomas Jr., PhD, for coming on today's podcast. Please go and order his book, Black Financial Culture: Building Wealth from the Inside Out. To learn more, go to his website. As I mentioned earlier, he is a stand-up comic as well. www.blackfinancialculture.com. Great TED Talk as well. On the behalf of the New Wealth Wave podcast, myself, my producer, Ray Haycraft, we'd like to thank again Dr. Michael G. Thomas Jr. for coming on the New Wealth Wave podcast. And Future Wealth Builders, understand that generational wealth begins with generational knowledge. I'll see you on the next New Wealth Wave podcast.
Thank you for joining us on the New Wealth Wave podcast, hosted by Dr. Joaquin Wallace. Our show is edited and produced by Ray Haycraft. To dive deeper into the world of financial wisdom and learn how to create your financial footprints, head to our website at www.drjwallace.com. For more updates and exclusive content, connect with us on social media by searching Dr. Joaquin Wallace. And if you have questions and comments, feel free to email us at thenewwealthwavepodcast@gmail.com. Remember, generational wealth begins with generational knowledge. And as always, thanks for listening. The content presented in this podcast is strictly for educational purposes and should not be taken as investment advice. The views and opinions expressed by our guests may not necessarily reflect those of the New Wealth Wave podcast and its host or producers. Listeners are urged to exercise discretion and judgment before making any financial or investment decisions. Always consult with a financial professional or advisor before taking any action based on the content of this podcast. If you're enjoying the New Wealth Wave podcast, we appreciate if you leave us a review. We're always open to topic suggestions and guest recommendations. Feel free to reach out to us directly with your thoughts and feedback. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the New Wealth Wave podcast.